going first? You don't know yet? Tell me what your names are and we'll figure it out.
Dora.
Good, Dora, hand up. Okay.
Hi.
How would you like to be referred to?
There. And Emma, she.
Cool. Okay. You should all be familiar with the standing orders by now. 7 minutes, first and last minute are protected. Keep in mind that you should probably take a POI, and when you do get one, leave 10 to 15 seconds for the speaker to say what they have to say. Their thoughts are important, probably useful to you as well. And if we're all ready, please welcome the Prime Minister to present the case on the motion that this House would introduce blind voting. Sorry, do you volunteer to keep time?
Yeah.
Awesome. Just in the case, if you're so interesting that we forget to bang, use your timers and common sense to know what's going on.
That's fine.
Off you go.
Ready? Two things in opening. First of all, the huge raft of improvements that this brings to political education and political engagement and how we think those are all improved. Then second of all, in a broader sense, how we think this creates a more representative and also a more legitimate politics. But before we go into those, first of all, let's talk about the mechanism. So we think the broad way this would work is that parties that are campaigning for seats within a province or a constituency or an area would be able to submit what their general policy is on a number of policy areas. These could be like 10 or 12 policy areas: environment, health, education, welfare, economics, this sort of thing. Which ones we choose could be dependent on what the issues of the day are. We think voters could then choose which of those policies that they most align with, and they could also indicate which ones they are most important to them and which ones are least important to them. And it's in this way we would aggregate the views of voters and then select, based on those results, which party they most align with and allocate their vote to that party. If there are any other points of clarification, I'm happy to take them now. Fantastic, we're all clear. So now on to this first point about what this does for the political education and engagement. So first of all, note the massive way this shifts the way political discussion happens. Because instead of trying to persuade partisan voters to remain in steadfast support of a broad ideological grouping of policies, often the policies of which aren't always clear to the voters that make that choice, instead, parties now need to persuade you to actually shift your ideological leaning and opinion to a new policy if they want your vote, which you think creates a far better discussion, because now parties are actually incentivized to bring real political education to the masses instead of trying to sweep those discussions under the rug if they think that, for example, bringing about that discussion might end up losing them votes, which you think is obviously a bad thing for voters in terms of getting a representative politics which brings about the changes they want to see. So we think that's actually far better. But also we're going to look at the way voters make choices and the way they decide to educate themselves. Because if we look at voters that actually decide to vote, once they have decided to involve themselves in that process, they will generally take some steps to make sure that they make the choice which is still best for them. Once they've decided to be a part of the system, they'll generally try and make sure the action they take at least helps them. So these voters that are involved will generally take some steps to educate themselves on some level. But in this system, that education is so much more valuable because instead of in the current system, you need to try and direct your educational efforts to what is a massive, huge ideological basket of policies that's often difficult to break into and difficult to understand the evolution and formation of. Now you can direct your education to some key policy areas which are much easier to understand and much easier to direct your time towards. So the educational efforts of voters are far more efficient, far easier to go into, less intimidating, and we think it's actually a process which new voters would end up taking and then educating themselves about, and a more informed populace is a better politically engaged populace which can make better decisions for themselves and generate a better society for themselves, which we think is massively important. Furthermore, we think this changes the role that money plays in politics, because at the moment, money, I'll take in a moment, stay standing. Money at the moment is involved in creating a very sort of pretty populist image that often attempts to cut through policy discussion, which can often be difficult to elucidate in, for example, a 30-second advert or a billboard, and simply paint a pretty picture of the face of that political party. But now that money has to be spent in an educational way to try and shift opinions, and if money's being spent in that way, we're happy for them to spend as much as they like. Go ahead.
We think a party's ideology is often quite easy and intuitive to grasp. We furthermore think that this is a way more long-term solution for unforeseen policies as well, because you know what you can expect from this party's ideology.
Okay. So in that sense, first of all, in terms of long-term expectations of the way a party might deal with unforeseen circumstances, we still have that benefit. It will still be clear when parties emerge as having won or lost. The ideologies of those parties can still be identified by looking at the policies which they have, right? The point is, at the point of voting, those policies aren't all grouped together with the ideology of that party, so we still get that benefit. In terms of it being very easy to do, we think that there's a trade-off there in terms of the ease and simplicity of the discussion that goes on and the value of that discussion. So whereas it's very easy for people to just align with whichever party their parents have voted for or their friends or community have voted for, we think that that comes at a massive trade-off in terms of the value of those discussions and the decisions you make actually being best for you. In terms of a really good example, see individuals that might live in like right-wing or left-wing areas or community or quite gated minority-based communities. They might face like huge societal pressures to simply vote for whichever party is very, very popular in that area, given the kinds of conversations that they have. But if instead the voting process is policy-based, no thanks, they may be actually made for the first time aware of which actual party their personal inclinations would lead them for. And it actually really helps those individuals break out of that political closet and actually identify for the first time the party which best serves their interests. We think that also has a knock-on benefit in terms of breaking down partisan support for parties, which isn't policy-based, but is instead based on heritage, which we think is worse because there are opportunities there. And thanks, your time's gone. There are opportunities there for you to actually select the wrong party based on what you actually care about and which parties bring about what's great for you. But in terms of bringing all those benefits together and explaining in a broad way what that means for politics, we think first of all it's far more representative. Why is that? Because we think a representative politics is one which does the best job of aggregating which policies voters want and bringing them about and bringing them to fruition, right? And we think a policy-based voting system is far better at detecting which policies a population wants and then bringing the party which will satisfy as many voters and bring about the most popular policies in that area, right? So we think that's far better when we try to rid ourselves of those partisan decisions which aren't policy-based and simply based on heritage. So we say in that sense it's more representative. But also we get a politics which people feel more involved in. That is crucial because at the moment people feel that politics is disengaged from themselves, disconnected from themselves, and is leaving them behind. And at the point at which people are making these specific choices and then seeing those actions happen, actions they picked, they feel their politics is taking notice of them and is serving them. Incredibly proud to propose.
I thank the gentleman for his fine speech, and we move to the opposition side. Please welcome your leader of opposition.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've got basically two main points today. Basically about the structural barriers to entry of new and small parties, also of independent candidates, which very often limit the ability of voters to actually have a radical new choice in elections, and to have the same old stale parties emerging. Secondly, about the sending on that basically the institutional advantage that these parties have, how to actually break these down in such an effective way to actually get a better politics emerging. Only one piece of which doesn't really fit into that category. So what we say is that basically that the main thrust of the first opposition case was how individual candidates are disempowered by this compared to central party organisation. We say we've got a few responses to this. First, we say that Western European parties are already fairly centralised organisations, that party leaders often have incredible power over their candidates. What can they do? They can kick people out of parties who they vehemently disagree with. They can not promote them into senior ministerial positions because they simply disagree with them on ideological grounds. They can not help them defend their seats by denying them access to like funding, and they can do, or for example, they can also deselect them and get the local parties to do so. All these things probably make sure that actually it's very unlikely that you're going to get the sort of candidate-driven parties which they want to see on that side of the house. But we also say, actually, I'm going to go on to this further, is that actually these individuals can probably stand far better to actually form new, smaller parties or stand as independents. And if the voters actually agree with these different opinions, which actually they are voicing within these parties, then actually they're more likely to be elected. And if they are not elected, then actually their opinion is unrepresentative of the voters in which they are intending to serve in the first place. So on both sides of that, we simply don't see a good thing emerging. Okay, so firstly, what we say is that basically there are many structural barriers to entry to new and small parties, that very often voting is not a choice, it is a reaffirmation of your personal partisan identification, as Matt already brought you to a certain extent. But we also say basically that certain communities already have particularly entrenched opinions of particular parties, in such a way that basically, for example, in the United States, even if you are a Republican who really wishes to win African American votes, it's almost impossible to do so because of historical disadvantages and basically tarnishing of the Republican brand amongst that community. What it does is it inhibits the ability of parties to reach out beyond their core constituencies and beyond their bases in such a way. Actually, basically, it means that individuals find it impossible to do so because they are stigmatised by a party brand, even if their policies actually are particularly weighted towards particular groups, communities. What does this do? It destroys voter choice at the point at which not only are there particularly strong connections to one party, but basically there's massive stigmas surrounding other parties in a particular community or other parties in a particular election, at which point we tend to see actually there's far less voter choice emerging in these sorts of areas where you do not get the sort of policies that you actually want. That's my part already brought. Basically, what this means is that you get more policy-driven elections. Instead of just the most charismatic persons standing on a television stage, you actually get politicians lobbying to try and change your opinions on immigration, or on the economy, or on healthcare, or education. In such a way, you actually get issues being mentioned rather than simply a case of who do you want to be the next resident of X building in X particular country. But in particular, we also tend to say that it is particularly problematic at the point at which people don't really even expect certain policies to actually emerge from sorts of administration because they actually had such a cursory glance over the manifesto that's been presented to them. So it's like, for example, when Obamacare was being raised in the United States, people were so utterly enthusiastic about having the first African-American president. They didn't actually bother to look at the fact that they had this massive healthcare overhaul, so actually they were utterly enraged when it emerged, even though it was a central plank of his campaign. People just didn't bother to pay attention to it because they were so focused on this really hyper-charismatic individual rather than the policies he was actually espousing. You get less good policies emerging when people are simply looking at someone who is basically there as a figurehead rather than as an individual espousing deeply important policy ideas which need to be implemented on a national level. What we also say on our side of the house is there are institutional problems which emerge for new and smaller parties and independents. So, for example, organisational backing. They mention things like trade unions and business. Now, this is incredibly problematic at the point at which they start to monopolise support in certain key demographic areas for one particular party. When they start delivering, business leaders or trade unions to a particular party, very often just out of loyalty rather than actual benefits occurring to their members. Because what we actually say is that very often that parties like big socialist parties like much of Europe, very often they have a monopoly on the white working class vote, even though many of them actually have moved to the centre and started to not represent that core constituency as much. They take it for granted because of the partisan loyalties which have basically been drawn with them over the decades. Because of that, we say actually that new and more radical left-wing parties which actually offer a better chance perhaps of working class liberation actually are driven out because there are already this loyalty to that particular party. Under our side of the house, what we say is a party espousing, say, a radical economic policy will get massive numbers of preferences from these particular communities, and in so doing will put pressure on, say, that mainstream, on, say, that more moderate left-wing party, either to abandon that constituency and let let it be taken by a party that better represents their interests, or to go back to that key demographic and actually start representing them properly rather than taking them for granted. In that such a way, I should say there's massive amounts of voter apathy and lack of engagement at the point at which you are taken for granted by people, either because you are living in a safe area for a particular party, or because basically you are taken for granted within your national party, even if, say, in your national party, that's why simply your views are not electorally determinative. At the point at which you have to vote for a particular set of policies, actually either the party must convince you that their side is correct, or they must move to your side. You don't simply get the glossing over effect of saying that at one point in time you represented your key demographic constituency in the country, and now, even though we don't do so anymore, remember what we did for you 40 years ago, which very often is what occurs, for example, with Democrats in the United States with the Civil Rights Act, or say countries across the European Union with moderate socialist parties now. What we also say is that basically you get more, say, independents being elected. So basically independents are a great force because very often they are more likely to compromise on non-partisan bases within Parliament, and therefore you're more likely to actually get solutions emerging which are not just due to party leaders espousing particular viewpoints. It is in direct contrast to what was given to us by the first opposition, the point at which basically you get this new set of individuals into Parliament, but more likely actually to compromise, more likely to actually espouse the sorts of views that voters actually want. Because at the point at which you start releasing the results of this test, it means that actually there are much more greater likelihood of politicians actually acknowledging what is popular. Actually, even if, for example, there's massive support for, say, not invading other countries, they must go to the country and say, we realize you disagree with us on this, but we actually are facing up to that fact and making decisions anyway, rather than currently claiming false support, which often they currently do, because there's no ability to determine the will of the electorate beyond vague opinion polls which occasionally emerge. Because of that, we say you get more legitimate politics, you get politics which actually engages better with people's opinions and preferences, rather than what you currently get, which is basically a contest to see if you can monopolise certain key demographics by looking at historical voting patterns rather than looking towards the future. We are incredibly proud to propose this motion.
Now we conclude the first half of this debate. Please welcome Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Okay, thank you for the floor. What we've heard mostly from opening government so far is talk about how to get more voters to participate in our democracy, how to get a more representative government, and let's see, how to get them out of this apathy thing, so how to get them to vote. We think that this is not the way to get voters to vote, because what they're actually proposing is a policy which makes it harder for voters to actually vote. Furthermore, we see that even if that would work, and even if more voters would vote, we see a lot of backlash in other ideas, such as like the long-term policies, like policies that are unforeseen at the moment that you do vote. So what I'm going to talk about is how a voter actually determines their vote, like how that process works, and why a voter wouldn't be more inclined to vote under this plan and wouldn't be able to make a better decision if he is to vote under this plan. And that's like comparatively a party and a party ideology or a candidate within a party, as you've heard from the leader of opposition, can work better actually. So what we've seen, like they're under the impression that voters will suddenly start looking at policies when they have to actually think about it. And this is directly like waves into my constructive. I say that when I try to decide on which party to vote for, and then I'm not talking about like a two-party system like the US, which they often seem to be confused with, but a multi-party system where you have a lot of parties and a lot of different options, I fill in a voting wizard. Do you know how much time that takes me to figure out what those policies actually mean? Do you then think that someone who is not that interested in politics and doesn't take the time in the status quo to find out what those policies actually mean will suddenly be interested in those policies and do something else than fill them in by gut feeling? We find that kind of hard to believe. Besides, and that's the second thing, sometimes I disagree with what the voting wizard eventually tells me. Sometimes it tells me that my interests, the policies that I filled out, compare best with the 55th plus party for like seniors. And then I believe that because those policies that I voted for happen to be constructed in a certain way to come to this outcome, doesn't mean that I actually believe that that is the best outcome for me, because I don't feel represented by that party, and I don't feel that they can represent me correctly in issues that are unforeseen. Because if, like they claim, voting on these particular policies is the best way to go, then let's just vote on those particular policies, right? Let's just do direct voting for them, have a referendum for those policies. It's for us, it's about those unforeseen policies. That's why we have an indirect government, because it's very inefficient to, if an issue pops up, say like, let's call out a referendum for a month or two. No, you want to then be able to make decisions with a representative government. That has to be done quickly. So you have to trust the people that actually represent you. And that's the issue that we have here. So we think that like, it's often an unforeseen policy. So we also don't buy into this belief that you will suddenly see your own policies enacted because you voted for them. We see that politics is compromising. And right now that's done by parties who have certain things that they think are more important, certain breakpoints for which they say, this thing we do not negotiate about, like if you think this is really the most important thing in your life, vote for us, because if we have to compromise on this, we'd rather not be in the government. Whereas under this plan, you just have policies. You just have a list of policies and nothing more. It's way harder to then say which policies are actually breakpoints for you and which are like kind of nice to have. We see that under the status quo that is possible because a party can represent a lot of different things and can say like, well, we sort of like gay marriage, but we're very sure we want to join NATO or leave NATO or whatever. Those are differences and weighings that you don't have under this plan.
Okay, under our system, the parties will know what policies got them elected, which ones had the most support, therefore they'll almost certainly push for them harder in, say, coalition negotiations. Under the status quo, they've got absolutely no idea which policies got the bigger mandate to actually enact, and therefore which one got the most electoral support.
Well, we already have a lot of polling for that. They do know which policies are the most important to a lot of voters. It's only in this plan that doesn't make it better. Like, people will just keep on voting for what their gut feeling tells them. Because that's how we see that things work right now. If you're afraid of populistic politicians like gaining more power than they should, then that's because they have this charismatic face and this nice rhetoric. In the future, under this plan, they will just use that same face and the same rhetoric to price up a certain policy. Because often, it's those populistic parties, the one thing that usually we dislike about them is that they have one big issue that they stand for, instead of being these round ideological parties that we like better often. So that one big issue will still be there, that's still what people will be voting for, that's still what it's still his charismatic face that will help bring that issue up. The only thing is that there might be other people who feel like they now actually have an obligation to find out these policies more and then say, well, if that's the case, I'd rather not vote because it was kind of easy to figure out which ideology I like, whether I'm more leftish or rightish, whether I want things to be divided more equally or I really despise taxes. That's a kind of easy choice to make. But if you then have to decide on all kinds of complicated policies on what to exactly do with Ukraine right now, or what to exactly do with the interest rate in the European Union, we don't think that those are the policies that you want to think about. And therefore we think you will disenfranchise voters more instead of less, because you will make it more difficult for them and you expect more from them. And your whole case, the whole government case so far, is based upon the idea that if we just expect more from voters, they will do more and they will live up to our expectations. We don't think that is the case at all. If that was the case, then the status quo would work perfectly, because we already expect a lot from voters and to look a lot at different parties, look at their policies, determine which parties fit them best. Only in the status quo, we also have the option to not just look at which policies they propose for issues that they already know are happening, but also which ideologies they have for the future and how they would then probably solve future policy issues. And that's the kind of long-term ideological choices that we want our people to make. We don't want them to think directly about these policies, because for that we can have direct referendums if it's very clear what we want to talk about. It's more about the long term, the unforeseen issues, and that's what we're really discussing here. Therefore, back to you to close.
Thank you. To move on to the second half of this event, please welcome the member of government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In this debate, what we as a team will bring as an argumentation will be actually how this blind voting will improve the low level of political engagement that exists by the citizens, and additionally how it will improve the political discourse among parties. Secondly, we'll speak about how this solves one of the crucial problems that the society is facing, the conflicts of different political parties rather than ideologies, and why this is a really important thing to be solved for modern societies. But before that, some points of rebuttal. What we mainly heard from the side opposition is firstly that the printing the printing policies could not be solved. We really think that a face cannot recognize certain policy and cannot sell it, because it's a matter of question what is important, not who is in the place, and having a picture or whatever portraiting, it's not a way addressed. And secondly, even if that is the case, we really think that it's more important people to associate with policies rather than individuals, because we have seen countries facing dictatorship because they have associated only with a person and what he has as a best idea to sell, like the Yugoslavian Brotherhood, like the Islamic states in the status quo, and having problems to solve their issues because someone is only calling on their religion. And we think that this shows a serious problem. And additionally, in my argumentation, I will explain you how they will actually more engage in political discourse, and how all the problems will be addressed that the first opposition says that it doesn't. Firstly, we seriously have problem how do we understand how the political system exists, and what we have expected from the electoral process. We think that in the status quo, the political parties are selling people important issues rather than people asking parties to solve their problems. And we think that this is a serious problem. Through campaigns, through having populistic narrative in their agendas, showing graphics that are not important at the end of the day, is the way how you actually make wrong decision when it comes to a situation. Huge political parties making researches what is the most important thing just in order to address only that thing and get the voters and appeal to their emotion. And having this policy, we are certain that the majority of the problems will be addressed through the political system, because people are the ones that understand their problems the best. Because having certain needs in your community is a way you actually show how you want to support. And people will not only be associated with national policies, but what on a regional or local level is a serious need. Having the system that exists, we have regions overvoting other and only addressing policies that are needed for a certain position. Additionally, we think that citizen movements will have bigger voice advocating for certain issues. Now the political parties have huge ways how to in their political agenda to have avoiding some of the discussions that are addressing in the society. And now we are forcing the political parties to be engaged in those ideas and actually empower the movements that have the most information, the best perspective, to bring a discussion what is the relevant issue and why parties are not solving the environmental issue, why the ethnicities and their rights are not satisfied, because in a manner the status quo usually makes the political parties to avoid some of the questions because it will backfire their polls at the end of the day. And having the criteria for discussion to be set on certain issues is a way how we actually make certain polls of discussion and bringing relevant discussions on what is the priority and why is that. Yes, before I go on.
So in the status quo, parties can already find out what are important policies and talk to voters exactly about that. In the future, under this plan, they will still set those policies.
Yeah, thank you. I have explained you how the political parties are not willing to address all the certain issues that exist. People don't have the communicational power, don't have the money that the political party have for their political agenda in order to promote what are their needs. The political parties are usually closed for all the comments that people have, and this is a serious problem. And now making them to address some of the issues will have to open their mind on all relevant criteria that the first government set, and probably the system evolving will show us what is the really important thing. And additionally, we think that the small parties cannot find place because of the money issue. Those parties have the most capacities to solve a certain issue. And we think that addressing this policy will open up space for their agenda and bringing them in the parliament to discuss their own issues that have never been represented previously, to make the other parties listen to them, why their solutions are better. And in this manner, we think that we're actually improving the discussion in the parliament, and we're improving and we're bringing together, bringing together the ones that are concerned about certain issue to be solved. And lastly, what conflict exists in the society? The division that the first government, the tradition that exists, is a serious problem coming to everyday life. People have been labeled because of the political party's mistakes. Supporting one political party and one of its bigger mistakes makes you an unpleasant person for the ones that don't support the party. Like having everyone supported George W. Bush probably have the problem to advocate for everything that he's done because of the wrong things that he has done. And in this manner, we think that we're improving the position because no one will be labeled for a certain solution, for a certain one and only act from a politician. Having all political questions being addressed, people will be empowered, people will more understand what are they standing for, and for all these reasons we beg you to propose.
Thank you. It's time for us to meet the final team in this debate. Please welcome your member of opposition. Just to check, you're Dora, right?
I'm Dora. So to briefly go through what have been said on the first table. Well, first we heard from the proposition that this introducing blind voting would actually contribute to political education and how it would focus all of our attention on policies and how it would lead to better representation, which sounds perfect, which sounds excellent, which sounds something we really want right now. However, what we heard from side opposition is reality check. That people are not interested enough to go search for any programs or parties as it is. And this is actually making it harder for them, and which will lead to even less people researching those programs than it is. Because people avoid any kind of trouble they would get into. So from that reality check we hear, even though these are very nice ideas, in practice they would just not work, and therefore they would not lead to this focus on policies, and they would not really bring us better representation and better policies in general afterwards. And also we have heard one other benefit that we have in the status quo, which would be lost in this, which is unforeseen consequences, and we strongly support this. We will talk about this in our argument, which is what happens if we introduce this. Then we heard from the member of government that this will improve low-level, actually small parties, and bring more small parties to the to this. I will also address this. What happens if we do this? And also, we heard from them how there are some political parties can avoid some key issues which should be discussed. However, we already have mechanisms that should be doing that. We have public debates which are transferred, you know, on TV when those people are asked important questions. So if they are saying that this way we will give more power to citizen movements to ask, but if citizen movements are not already willing to ask those questions, so if they are not when they are given the opportunity to ask, if they are not willing to ask now, why would we suppose that they would ask then? And so also they're saying that this will solve the problem when you are marked by mistakes that were made by political party that you chose. However, you are still choosing a political party. You're choosing maybe in a different way, but however, you have in the end elected a party. We have not abolished parties, only integrated political programs. We have just chosen a different way of choosing parties. So in the end, if that party you have chosen again makes mistakes, again you will be labeled for that. And now, yes.
It's well known that the biggest cause of voter apathy isn't the process being difficult. It's people feeling that their choice doesn't actually indicate what they think because they think the dominant parties are all the same. This helps people say what they actually believe.
Well, yeah, that is exactly what I was coming to, because people, if we introduce this blind voting, I will show you now how it will lead to even worse consequences, which will lead people to be even less motivated to participate and even more demotivated and disappointed in their government. So what will happen if we introduce this? First of all, we will introduce not the parties with best programs, but the parties with best catch lines or best keywords into their programs. So we are not actually choosing a program, we are just choosing a short description, you know, which we will circle. So actually the ones who win will not be the most competent people, will not even be the people with the best programs, because you won't be able to sum up the whole policy in that voter's paper. It will be just the best catchphrase or something that sounds most interesting and that sounds more populist. So in the end, you will not get the most competent party. You will not even get the best policies. You will just get the best writers of political phrases. No, thank you. So which will lead to even worse policies being introduced, especially in unforeseen consequences. But even within those policies that we elected, because we thought we were electing those. However, in the introduction of those policies, when we will expect them to take place, we will even then be even worse disappointed in the political system and the voting system. And what is worse? What can happen now? So if you voted for a political party and they did terrible, they did not live up to the expectations. So what can you? You can punish that party by not voting for that party again. However, here you cannot punish that party because you do not know which party you are voting for. So for the next election, they can just rewrite their catchphrases or the one that you will circle about their program or your attitude towards that program. So in the end, you can end up electing the same people, the same party, and we lose this important control mechanism which helps us in the status quo. Next, you also lose stability, because if you bring a lot of small parties, it will be much harder for them in the parliament to gain enough vote to actually pass a law. It will be much harder for them to introduce those policies that you voted them for, because also when they form coalitions, they will have to actually resign on some of those ideas or some of those programs you voted them to conduct. So actually you're not getting back what you asked for in those when you vote in this blind voting way. Also, what will we lose? We will lose strong parties that are able to make some hard decisions, which is especially important in this age of economical crisis. So sometimes parties do need to take unpopular policies, like increasing taxes or something else, you know, to help the situation. But people will never vote for increased tax. Please increase my tax. So you will never get those hard decisions made, and we will lose in that way. So why is this system better? Because we choose people, not just people, not just their faces, but their reputation, their history. We know who they are. We know if they are capable or not, or if they have shown themselves capable. We know which are their policies outside of those few that can fit on the voting paper on which we can actually vote. So we actually vote for a much bigger picture, for a much more comprehensive policies and programs than we would be voting in this system. In this system, we would be voting for a selected number of programs, selected by who? How do you formulate those demands is also very important. So it can also be manipulated in a way so it fits a certain party. So we do not know who we are voting for. We do not know if those people will be actually as competent to follow up on their promises. And finally, nothing actually makes them obligatory to conduct all of those programs they have promised. So in the end, we see that voters will be disappointed, that we will lose participation, we will lose representation, and all in all, we are getting a much worse place than when we started from. Thank you.
I thank the lady for her speech, and to conclude this debate for the government side, please welcome the government whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I assume today that people in the Ferguson community are not very happy with Barack Obama. Although he represented minorities, although he represented and everybody voted, all the minorities voted for them, he actually didn't represent any policy which will solve, I don't know, racial profiling or brutality from the police in the communities. And this is something that is very important, because you cannot put a very important policy inside a catchphrase. This is something that cannot be done. Barack Obama was yes we can, but he actually didn't do nothing about yes we can. He didn't stop Guantanamo. He didn't I don't know. He pulled out he didn't pull out troops from Afghanistan. And even though everybody in today's problem is that parties are actually facing very much on a marketing. And that is something that is very important. They're searching the most appealing face. They're searching the person, if his marital status and all the stuff, because they don't care about the policy. With our model here, we're actually making the parties to do what they were intended to do, to support policy inside the parliament. From now on, they cannot avoid something that they actually promised on their ballots before. Because if I have voted for, I don't know, increasement of tax, or I don't know, I have voted for LGBT marriage, you cannot say that the party that is not parliament there will not introduce that policy. Because they will be accountable for that, because they are in that position in the parliament, because they have promised something. In these days, we have people actually having nice catchphrases, having everything like being most appealing and all that stuff, but they are avoiding policies because they are afraid to do so, because they can actually, I don't know, affect their stand in the polls or stuff like that. From now on, this will not happen. And basically, the first thing that my partners talk about, and this is very important, now we have parties who are in a very low engagement in society, because parties know the real formula. Like choose the right person who is most appealing, choose who has most money, I don't know, who has most money for TV ads and all that stuff, and put him in front of the public, like choosing a right actor for the right movie. And this is something that is very scary, because the real policies are not, the policies who actually people care about are not introduced inside the system. What we're saying here, from now on, policies are the first prior thing that we choose choosing for a politician. This actually gives a chance for the small parties, because small parties are the ones who are closest with the people, because they actually represent a smaller group. So basically, smaller groups know what actually they need, and they will not need the money, because their policy is something that actually is accountable. But before I continue.
So indirect democracy is about giving your vote to someone who you trust to make decisions for you. How is this possible if you only know a party's preferences on a handful of issues?
Well, basically, we're not electing parties. We are electing a policy, and with that, we are choosing the right party who can implement that policy. In these days, we are choosing a party without recognizing all its policies, and that is something that is very, very scary and threatening to the system. The second thing, which is very, from now on, we will force parties to engage more with the people. They will need to research what actually people want, what kind of policy they actually want, and what kind of policy they want to be implemented. Maybe people don't want LGBT marriages, or maybe they want legalization of marijuana. Basically, this actually gives stance to movements which are important in the country, because we have, in this moment, we don't have collaboration between movements and parties, because we have strong movements, but they don't have political influence because in the party, thanks to tradition, or because, I don't know, just neglecting the movement and just going with their agenda in order to be in the parliament. So now on, if people really care about some important issue, and we see a very strong movement raising around that issue, basically parties will need to be interested in order to solve that issue, and this is something that is very, very important, because people now have a voice on a certain policy. Now the individual is not the one who is representing me in the House of the Parliament, but the policy is the one who is representing me in the House of Parliament. Because we believe we have very quality politicians in the small parties, or somewhere in the system, but maybe they're not most appealing, or most they're having the right setup to be introduced in the political scene. And so basically what we are making here, we are making a setup so that people cannot avoid the policy issue, because if you cannot pack a policy issue with with a pretty face, because policy needs to be explained. You need to explain how you're going to do that. It's not only saying yes we can, but you need to explain how you can actually how you can do it. The second thing is the conflict, and how we have the conflict in our society, something that my partners told. Basically we have two things. We have traditions, and people are voting for a party not because they believe in their cause, because the tradition is something that is making them vote for them. For example, conservative Americans are considered to be Republicans, and this is something that is scary, because maybe they have some different opinions that the party is representing in the system. Maybe conservative Americans actually agree on LGBT marriages, but that's not the party that is representing, because they are following the general idea. Maybe I have different kind of solutions for different kind of value. It doesn't mean that I'm stuck with that. And the second thing is that you're actually being labeled as you're being labeled as with the party, and this is and you're being like represented by the party. You're being identified by the party. From now on, people will not be identified by what party they support, but what kind of policies they support. And why this is a good thing, because it's actually representing the real opinion of the people. And because now we have parties who are actually just presenting a nice story, nothing more. But from now on, we will have the actual representation of people, what they think on a certain policy. Maybe they will go conservative, or maybe they will go liberal, but it's up to the people. It's not up to the party, and that's the real democracy that we actually want. This is the basic principle of democracy. People actually deciding on what kind of issue they want to solve the problem. And so for this reason, because we are making the parties to have more engagement, and we are lessening the conflict in society, we are proud to propose this motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now, to conclude this debate for all of us, and all the other rounds, debate 2 and round 6, please welcome Officer Short.
Enough space. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, in today's debate we raised some important questions. Which is the status quo, or this new model? Which one is more representative? Which one more engages with people? And which one is more helpful in for the future of the country and for the future of the citizens? Now, I would like to show you how their mechanism or their model has some serious gaps in it and simply does not work in the real world. Yes, ideally, it's a very nice idea. Ideally, it could engage more people if people are really willing to go and vote while while in the process of voting they have to read a bunch of policies they probably won't really understand. And in that kind of world we live in, this is simply not a good idea, and it will not work, it will disengage people, and it will not educate them in the way they want to. Now, the marketing we have so far has developed in a way that catches people's attention, yes. And it's developed in a way which in much more explicit and clear ads and posters shows people which, so in much shorter and explicit way shows which party is on which side or which policies they're promoting, which is much more attracting to voters than having to sit down and read through all those policies. So we can, through ads and promotion, we can, through marketing and through pre-elections, we can show everything they're talking about, but in a much shorter and simpler way for people. Their mechanism is not, no thank you, their mechanism is not very transparent. How so? Because, first of all, it's easy to manipulate. Who is going to, it is very subjective to choose which policies are going to be written in those voters' papers. And also it's very subjective how are we going to match, because probably different parties have in different questions similar policies, or in similar questions have very different policies. But it's very subjective of who is going to work on those voting papers and who is going to decide which answer matches with which party. We also believe that it is not in those policies it is not possible to cover all issues, and there are always going to be people who are engaged in politics and who will always go and check the programs they have, which they're able to find on internet, so the program and policies are always available to people. And it's much better than to have some shorter it's better to have the status quo way of promoting different parties in pre-elections than writing all those policies down and then making people go and read them and vote for them. Because, as I said, people are lazy and people won't do it, and in the end we'll just disengage them and we'll have less voters voting. Also, there is this big problem of false promises, or writing sketchy, writing sketchy phrases and sketchy policies. Because, yes, in the end of the day, they will also try in those policies, in their model, try to write more interesting, more popular policies, because in the end of the day, they need to attract the attention, and that is a key. That is simply the key of pre-elections. And that is simply the key of how the parties are getting their voters. So they need to attract their attention. And while writing those policies, they will also write something which is maybe, which they will know is more popular, which they know people will choose. In the end of the day, it is not transparent, because we will choose, for example, by choosing some policies, we'll choose a party which will be the main leading party in the parliament. And what if? And they probably won't be able to fulfill all their policies or all their promises. And in the next election, we won't be able to know, again, we'll choose different policies, but we won't be able to know which party stands behind those policies. And we might choose again the same party, which didn't keep up to their promises in the previous elections. So in that way, this is not as transparent as status quo is, in which, yes, we know which party has which politicians in it, they have a certain credibility, they have certain historical facts behind their decisions, and it is much more transparent to choose parties when you have to circle a name of the party rather than their policies, and you don't know which party stands behind those policies. No, thank you. Then they were talking about smaller parties, that how in their model smaller parties will be able to get to the parliament. But actually, again, smaller parties are just not going to be able to come through different coalitions that will have to form, and those policies that we have chosen in their model will again get lost. So that is another way why their system is simply redundant and not needed in our system. Okay, I'll take you.
What we're saying is no matter who represents us, we don't want to avoid important issues of the citizens. We want parties to compete with their political agendas in parliament in order to
But that's
solve
already
issues.
happening. Parties need to set their agenda, parties need to set their goals, parties need to set their policies, and they are writing them down. And what I'm saying is that in your way, so all we've heard from government is that we're engaging more people. We are making their voice being heard. But we're not. In the end of the day, they're just going to vote. If they just circle the policies they won't vote, how is that changing from status quo? How are they going to be more involved? Or how is their voice going to be more heard in that way? It's not going to be. Well, again, in the status quo, it's not that bad because we have TV, we have different ways or different ways in which people can make. So the parties want to preserve their spot in the parliament, and they will, of course, they won't make some decisions that will be so against their voters. In the end of the day, I hope I showed you how this model is actually not engaging people in it, and is much less representative than the model we have right now. Thank you.